Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, the man in triple black, the golden stallion of the tech world, Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now, here's Brian.
The Libertine-in-Chief, ready for another great episode of Sovryn Tech. And of course, I hope you're all ready, which I assume you are since you're listening to me right now. And anyway, yes, the Golden Stallion here with you, ready to spill the seed of liberty just like we do every single week. I want to let you know, I told you there'd be a special out this week. I postponed it. But I think you're really, really going to like it. The top 10 nonfiction books in the Golden Stallion's opinion. And I think you're really, like I said, it was a fun podcast. I kind of like the idea of doing that. And actually I've contemplated, like I said, I'm going to be shaking up the show quite a bit within the next couple episodes here. I've contemplated, maybe doing like a full show that's all listener emails, because I get quite a few and I really like once a week getting to them is just not cutting the cheese. Anyway, let's go ahead. Let's get right into our rapid fire stories. Though, you know what, real quick before I do, if you're not, please, I want you to go to I want to see you at PorcFest. So whoever's going to be at PorcFest, please, I'll be there all week. Don't hesitate. Say hello. It's always a pleasure at any of these conferences, be it at a Bitcoin conference or Liberty Forum, or in this case, PorcFest. It's always great to meet listeners. I really enjoy that. And we always have really amazing conversations because, you can only do so much via email and social networks social media networks, forget it. Anyway, so if you're there, if you're not coming, please believe me, you won't regret it. And if you are coming, come see me and, say hi. So anyway, all right, rapid fire stories time. Let's get to it, because we've got a couple of really huge topics to discuss. Past few weeks, it hasn't so much been direct stories. I mean, I have links here that we'll be talking about, but it has been some pretty big subjects and kind of introducing things into that, maybe so that way down the line we can get into finer points of these topics and these issues and really explore, a world where science and technology are, they're making love, with culture in general. So, all right, rapid fire stories. This is exciting. Last week I think it was last week, maybe it was a couple weeks ago, I talked about what I thought was one of the most exciting computers to get released really in years. And that was HP's Android laptop, the SlateBook 14, which I think looks fantastic. Hasn't been any new news on that. But this is something I talked about a few months back, which was the LG Chromebase, which is essentially, if you can picture an iMac, one of the modern iMacs where it's just like a computer built into a screen. That's what this is. And of course it runs Chrome OS though. And we finally, all the features were pretty good. I mean, it's not the greatest. It has like 8 gig for flash memory for a hard drive. That's, 2 gig of RAM. The screen's pretty nice. It's like a 21-inch screen, comes in black or white, which is great. Of course I'd get the black one. But the price is really the cincher. Was that, would people be willing to buy this, especially if LG is going to charge, say, $500, $600? They got to keep it under $400 is what everybody was saying, myself included. And it sounds like they pulled it off. Sounds like they're doing it at like $350. So they listened, and good. I think this is pretty slick. Also, it can work as a monitor in and of itself, as in you could hook up a bigger computer to the Chromebase. And that's not a bad option. I mean, if you can, flip between Chrome OS and like, say, Windows, all from the fact that, and you're using a pretty good looking 21.5-inch monitor. I mean, why not do it? I think that's pretty slick, because Chrome, again, for security, not privacy. I'm not necessarily saying privacy, but for security, is really second to none in the world right now. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. Anyway, Elon Musk is suing the government. I actually got a few space stories here for Rapid Fire Stories. Elon Musk is suing the government because essentially he feels that the Air Force is getting sweetheart deals as far as rockets go, because he wants SpaceX to be providing quite a bit of the rocket launching ability, payload launching ability that the U.S. government, quote unquote, needs. So, and I give him credit for suing the government. I think that's pretty funny. So, in fact, right now there's stories coming out that really the U.S. government can't they can't launch anything into space. And with everything going on in Ukraine between Russia and America, Russia's not willing to handle U.S. payloads and U.S. missions. So, the U.S. government might want to run to Elon Musk for this, but whatever. I could get in, maybe this is a story for another time, but the actual history of NASA, no, I don't mean like Dark Mission by Hoagland and Barra. I mean, the actual real mission behind NASA was all about spy satellites. It had nothing to do with actual space exploration. So, and not to say that Russia going up there wanted to do any differently, but just I'm not a fan of the U.S. in space. Anyway, but speaking about in space, they found out that on Jupiter, or around Jupiter, I should say, looks like there could be all kinds of life. Not on Jupiter itself, but around it, because you have Europa, which you've talked about that there could be life there. Now they're saying Ganymede has, essentially has oceans that are sort of like a sandwich, has multiple layers. And within, somewhere in that sandwich, maybe at the salami, there could be life. Pretty fascinating. And it makes you wonder too, because how far ahead was Arthur Clarke thinking when he wrote, what would it be, 2061? Or was it 2010 when he turned Jupiter into another sun? Because the moons around Jupiter were essentially their own little solar system, and they had the ability for complex life to develop. It's interesting. Now it's not just Europa. It might be Ganymede as well. So let's see. Switching gears to tech, the federal government is dalliancing, flirting with the idea of creating an online ID system. Now, the private market, Google, Facebook, all these companies, they do a terrible job of an ID system. I can only imagine just how bad the government would do at that. And in fact, the article that I read about this from, the person, that was telling the story for the government, for the U.S. government, even said, yeah, we're not good at this, but we could outsource it. Well, to who? There's nobody that this whole online identity thing. This is something where, I've said it before on Sovereign Tech, where the internet is really, we don't know how it's going to take shape and how it's going to shape the human experience. Okay. And so a lot of these ideas just haven't really come together very well. And so an online ID system is, frankly, it's just going to be a clusterfuck, especially from the government. And one last bit, this just a funny story, is that Google X, these are the guys that only think within science fiction, apparently tried to create a jetpack, and they just thought it was impractical, but they were working on a jetpack and they thought it was impractical. What a shame. This is one of the ones I would have been like, okay, no, yeah, let's do this. And I wouldn't care if it ran on Android. Android's, relatively solid as long as you keep it up to date. Yeah, I wouldn't have minded a jetpack. I'm a huge fan of The Rocketeer, quite frankly, not just the movie. I'm talking about the comics. But anyway, they decided it wasn't really worth it. I don't know about you, but I think it's far more practical and needed thing than Google Glass is by a long shot. Anyway, let's get into long shots and far out tech. This is a story that was kind of doing a double tech roulette here to a degree. This is a story sent in by a listener, and I really appreciate him sending this in. And we're going to talk about free energy. Okay, now it's not a topic I've brought up a lot on Sovereign Tech. I actually did do an entire special with the inimitable Rich Dana about energy technology in general, and really how it's there was some talk throughout history about how it's sort of been quashed by various interest groups. We weren't necessarily talking about free energy, but in this case we are. And the story I'm going to read from comes from, and this is the first clue into the validity of the story, comes from a site called Collective Evolution, and it's collective-evolution.com. Free energy live in action. This is breathtaking as science is being rewritten. Watching this video was quite an experience. It's perhaps because I've been following this topic for so many years now, and amidst all the doubt and negativity from mainstream science, amazing scientists have put together devices that time and time again show that our current understandings of science and physics can use some updating. To begin, I want to define what I mean when I say free energy. I refer to it as getting more energy out than you put in, and or not requiring input and having energy be produced perpetually. To answer the question, yes, this device will need part replacement, bearing, belts, etc., at some point in its lifespan. Minimal costs involved here, though. For a moment, forget about suppression of these technologies and simply focus on the fact that they are here, working, and will eventually hit the mainstream to people, for people to build and purchase themselves. If you haven't heard of the QEG, that's Quantum Energy Creator, always get worried when the word quantum comes out. Always. I don't care if NDT is saying it or if Michio is saying it, always get worried when quantum comes out. Then this is going to be a nice surprise for you. This device is based off of Tesla's work, where he built a resonance generator that required 1 kilowatt input to produce 10 kilowatt output. This device works in the same way and was built after his patents were released into the public domain. Years of testing and adjusting was done to make the device possible and available for others to build. There's a key sentence right there. We'll get into that. This new device will require 1 kilowatt of input power to get the core resonance up, and then after it's producing 10 kilowatts, it can be unplugged and an inverter is attached, so no input power will be required. Another key sentence. Yes, this means what it is saying. After a short period of input power, no input will be needed to supply 10 kilowatts of power. As stated by Hope Girl, who released the plans upon open source to the public, the QEG belongs to humanity now. Many will make further improvements, and we will all co-develop this practical bridge technology together. Beautiful words, as this world doesn't need to be built off money, greed, patents, ownership, and power. These are archaic, egoic concepts that we can evolve out of quite effortlessly. Have a look at the moving video, and there's a video there that you can check out on YouTube. You are seeing just the beginning of this device, as more tweaks will be made in the coming days to increase the output power. Message to the world: if we can get a QEG up and running in Morocco, we can do it anywhere. That's from Tomas, Quebec. This device will also be built in Taiwan, and more teams are building them in other areas of the world. And there's this, really quote unquote emotional video that's linked here from YouTube, where essentially, this person gets a QEG, a quantum energy generator, up and running to where, he pushes in a kilowatt of power, 1 kilowatt, and next thing you know, it's producing 10 or so. And that's, if this were real, that'd be great. Okay. Especially because, the average household requires a good 5 to 10 kilowatts, to run. So this would essentially, if it worked, okay, if the QEG actually works, I mean, every house could power itself seemingly indefinitely. Just every once in a while, you'd have to turn it off and, replace some parts on it, and then maybe shoot in another 1 kilowatt of power just to, to prime it effectively. And there you go. And it's efficient, because what does it usually take to produce, like I say, the average household, 5-10 kilowatts of power. It generally takes 15 kilowatts to produce that 10, okay, you have to put, because of things like friction and, all the stuff that allows for the loss of, if you know anything about like perpetual motion machines, why don't they work? Part of it is because there's so many forces working against, the idea of a closed system. Closed systems don't exist. So you have things like friction that wouldn't allow for, 10 kilowatts to produce exactly 10 kilowatts. You need like 15 kilowatts for that to occur. Okay. You got to put in more than you're going to get out. That's how it works. But the QEG is the exact opposite. It's saying that, hey, no, we can actually put in very, very little and then let it build up and it'll produce more. Now, is all this true? No, it's not true. In fact, this is a very, very unfortunate scam. And it's not a new one. So this is something, my dad was, well, a pretty intelligent guy. I'm not going to go down his list of achievements, but he's a very intelligent guy, very, very much in the science world. And for a while, I mean, now he's, got into software, but, but he was in the science world. And I remember him talking about these sorts of things in the late 80s and early 90s when I was just a little kid. And this whole idea, certainly different name, was popular back then. And yet nobody has any of this yet. Let's not take that as the evidence. Let's use the evidence for what it is. If you look at the video, if you watch the video, there's very clear pictures. You can look up a bunch of pictures and a bunch of videos on the QEG. And there's going to be one thing that's going to stand out to you the whole time in any of these pictures and in any of these, these videos of the device operating. It never gets unplugged. Ever. There's never a point where it's running when it's unplugged. Now, what would happen if they did unplug it? Would it keep producing? No, that's why it's never unplugged. In fact, it might run for a few minutes after the fact, just because of the built up of power that's in there, but then it's just going to stop. There are zero, zilch, zippo reports of anybody seeing this thing or any videos or any photos or whatever evidence that could possibly exist out there that shows a QEG running when it's not unplugged. So there's evidence against it, number one. Now, please don't misunderstand. I wish this existed. I wish this was real. Okay. I wish this actually worked, but we mentioned a couple sentences. Okay. And one of them, one of the sentences is that, you can, well, let's see here. Okay. Here it is. Years of testing and adjusting was done to make the device possible and available for others to build, because the plans are in the public domain. So you can look at the plans. Okay. But it gets worse when you look at those plans, and you can check them out and you can read these things for yourselves. And there's all, links in the show notes, sovereigntech.com. When you look at the plans, there's a whole bunch of really fine, legalese inside of it. A lot of fine print. So let's see. Fix the World, which is the company that's releasing these plans, is not responsible for the actions of others. We can only tell you our experience. We have discovered it. It is essential that those wishing to build a QEG use careful thinking, patience, and consideration for the greater good. Here's another one. If you are trained in traditional physics and have not been doing this work for many years, you must first do your research on basic quantum energy devices and how they work. What happens is that when you get these plans, when you download these plans, there is a group of people to contact, Fix the World, okay? And they will charge you approximately $300, maybe a phone call, or $300 a month, or however much, whatever the time frame is. And they will act as consultants to help you put all this together, okay? And they're even telling you, if you don't have a knowledge of physics, that this isn't going to happen. That really, you got to go to school first. You need to be a PhD before you can even put this thing together. I hate to say it, but the whole thing is a scam. They will keep charging you. They will charge you for years, and you will think that it's worth it because eventually you're not going to have to pay an electric bill anymore, right? They will tell you that it's worth it to pay them the $300 a phone call or the $300, a month or whatever. And you're just going to keep going and going and going. You're on this, you're pretty much on a treasure hunt for Overunity. Okay. And it's, I hate it. Believe me, I hate it so much, but it's all a scam. Okay. Now it's true. All right. What the Collective Evolution website said, in that we don't have, a full grasp on science and physics and things of that nature. We really don't. I mean, even math, arithmetic's incomplete. We know that. So yeah, there's things to figure out. Sure. But as far as we can tell right now, this idea of, or what's commonly called Overunity, Overunity has to do with perpetual motion machines, like I mentioned earlier, which don't exist as yet because closed systems, don't really exist in the universe. Okay, it's not achievable. And some people talk about there's this stuff's been going on. Like I said, my dad used to talk to people who were trying to schlep these ideas off. And even back then they were offering their consulting services. But I mean, like cold electricity, people would talk about that. Or Tesla had his electric car, not the one by Elon Musk, but an original Tesla electric car that supposedly had a black box with some vacuum tubes on it in the engine, and then a wire going through the chassis, and essentially the car drove 90 miles per hour and it drove for 8 days strong, without needing to refuel or recharge. These ideas have been around for a very, very long time, and none of them have come into fruition. Now, people can say, well, it's technology that's being suppressed, blah, blah, blah. And there's some degree of truth to that. I mean, there's like engines that could run on peanut oil that would be pretty inexpensive, right? Developed by the same guy that invented diesel, the diesel engine. And there's always that rumor about, the best one I'd heard, and there's even a plaque for it at Daytona Beach when I lived in Florida, about a guy who built an engine that, got 120 miles to the gallon. So, I mean, these ideas, aren't necessarily new. They've been trying to get developed for a very, very long time, and none of them have really come up. And today, in fact, I think it was more possible years ago to develop these things, because now half the time, you got to order like an Alliance catalog, because you're not going to find all these parts at Radio Shack anymore. These things could have been developed years ago if they existed, and we'd be able to, someone out there would have talked about it by now. So I wish that the QEG was real, but these things, not real yet. Anyway. I'll be back with more. This is Sovryn Tech.
Hey, look! Got an energy spike. Hold on! Launch. Now! Bombing the Narn back to the Stone Age wasn't enough for you?
Then we heard it. The sound of something terrible being born.
This is madness!
Station 3 to Commander Ivanova.
Centauri have launched a full-scale assault.
Time is coming on! It's our turn now!
2 million tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night. A world where empires rise and fall, where dreams are born and die, where war and hatred are challenged by love and faith. In the third age of mankind, an age plagued by an evil empire that seeks to destroy humanity. It is our last, best hope for peace, for victory, for freedom. It is Babylon 5.
Babylon 5 is available for download on your favorite torrent site. See it now to experience the greatest show in television history. Babylon 5.
Tech Roulette. Want to play?
It is time for Tech Roulette, which really last segment we kind of did Tech Roulette too anyway, right? Yes, you can send me your stories, sovereigntech@riseup.net, or on Twitter or on Google+. Again, if you want to help out the show, totally for free, there's a lot in the show notes and on the left-hand side of sovereigntech.com. You can donate via PayPal. I got a lot of donations in the past week. I really appreciate that so much. But you can donate PayPal. You can donate Bitcoin, Blackcoin. Really excited about Blackcoin. Big stuff going on with that one, huh? You name it, Litecoin, NXT, BitShares. I mean, there's so many things available. Aurora Coin. And if there's something there that you want to donate in that's not listed, send me an email and I'll get you set up. Okay. So I really appreciate all those donations. But if you want to help out the show for free, again, the best thing you can do is get my Twitter followers up and my Google Plus circles up. So if you add me on Google Plus, if you add me to your circles on Google Plus, or if you follow me on Twitter, or on SoundCloud, SoundCloud's the big one. If you can do those, I mean, that helps the show out immensely. So thank you. A lot of you have done that and I really appreciate it. It helps the show out a lot. It helps me out a lot personally too. So anyway, before I get into this story, and some might find this depressing, we're going to talk about AI and what Dr. Stephen Hawking has to say about it. But, before I do, an interesting area to look, with this whole conversation of Overunity and cold electricity and quantum energy generators and, free energy, essentially. The really interesting place to look is that, before electricity became as big a deal as it was, we're talking in the late 19th century here, there was a lot of exploration, and I wish I could remember the book about it that talked about it, but I read it like a decade ago. There was a book about the history of magnetism, which essentially was all about how magnetism was being, ideas with magnetism were being used to come up with alternatives to what steam power and electrical power was achieving. And this is really, I think, an area that's worth exploration, is looking into, okay, what advancements, and there may not be enough information out there, but I'm sure if we look hard enough, we'll find it. What were the advancements that were happening that didn't have anything to do with electricity, that were beyond electricity? And what could we come up with there? This is like what steampunk's all about, right? What could we do with steam power and all this? Well, there are other things like magnetism that were being researched pretty heavily in the 19th century. And I think those are places to look if we're looking for some kind of perhaps independence from the system, some serious off the grid. And of course, the king of it all is solar power, which solar power I want everywhere. Solar power and wind power, I think, is fantastic. Anyway, let's get into this other story. Enough of the energy business. Stephen Hawking says AI, that is artificial intelligence, of course, could be our worst mistake in history. Ooh. This is interesting. The world's most famous physicist is warning about the risks posed by machine superintelligence, saying that it could be the most significant thing to ever happen in human history, and possibly the last. As we've discussed extensively here at IO9, the stories from IO9, artificial superintelligence represents a potential existential threat to humanity. So it's good to see such a high-profile scientist both understand the issue and do his part to get the word out. Hawking, along with computer scientist Stuart Russell and physicist Max Tegmark and Frank Wilczek, says that the potential benefits could be huge, but we cannot predict what we might achieve when AI is magnified, both good and bad. Writing in The Independent, the scientists warn, looking further ahead, there are no fundamental limits to what can be achieved. There is no physical law precluding particles from being organized in ways that perform even more advanced computations than the arrangements of particles in humans' brains. An explosive transition is possible, although it might play out differently from in the movie. As Irving Good realized in 1965, machines with superhuman intelligence could repeatedly improve their design even further, triggering what Werner Vinge called a singularity, and Johnny Depp's movie character calls transcendence. One can imagine such technology outsmarting financial markets, out-inventing human researchers, out-manipulating human leaders, and developing weapons we cannot even understand, whereas the short-term impact of AI depends on who controls it. The long-term impact depends on whether it can be controlled at all. So facing possible futures of incalculable benefits and risks, the experts are surely doing everything possible to ensure the best outcome, right? Wrong. If a super alien civilization sent us a message saying, we'll arrive in a few decades, would we just reply, okay, call us when you get here? We'll leave the lights on? Probably not, but this is more or less what is happening with AI. Although we are facing potentially the best or worst thing to happen to humanity in history, little serious research is devoted to these issues outside nonprofit institutes such as the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk, the Future of Humanity Institute, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, and the Future Life Institute. All of us should ask ourselves what we can do now to improve the chances of reaping the benefits and avoiding the risks. And of course, there's a link here in the show notes. You can go to sovryntech.com. Always check out the show notes because they're just loaded with info and links for what we talk about during the show. And, this is pretty interesting. Now, I don't know how much they're necessarily, again, their definition, they're using the Werner Vinge definition of singularity, which is the same one that I generally use, which is just the point where machines build better machines. So, essentially that machine, a computer will develop another computer that is outside of the development ability of humanity. Okay. Now, a lot of people treat the singularity as when we're going to upload our brains into computers. Okay. That Ray Kurzweil has popularized. And I want to touch on that point too, but I want to touch on this first. And actually they're going to kind of come together. This is something, certainly that's been worked on for some time, developing AI. I think a lot of people, the Terminator movies come to mind when people think AI. They think of Skynet, right? Skynet taking over the world, seeing that humans were actually a problem and they were inefficient. And so they decide to wipe out the humans. And, I don't think it's unfair to think of Skynet. I don't think it's unfair to think of the Terminator movies or the original Harlan Ellison story that the Terminator movies were based off of. And, in so thinking of those things, a lot of people get very scared. And then there's people who say, oh, come on, that's in a movie and all this. And they try to just write off people's fears when I agree with Dr. Hawking here. Maybe we shouldn't write off those fears so quickly. And I want to explain why. Okay. First off is that, because what the initial person will say is that, look, we can program it so that it never harms a human being. And then I say, okay, that's been tried before. That's been thought out before. That thought experiment has been done in the past by Isaac Asimov. I bring up this point often with iRobot, where he laid out the rules that seem perfect, simple and perfect, which is how, if you're going to put in programming rules, it's how they should be. Simple and perfect rules for robots to not harm human beings and thus allow them to have, a degree of autonomy. Automatons with autonomy. What happens in that book is you find out the logical process that a programmed, that a robot, that an AI can go through to where they can break those rules effectively and kill a human being. Okay. So to the best that we know, no matter what kind of programming rules you set up, if you have an AI, okay, it is not going, it will find a way around that, especially if maybe the key to that, of course, is that the AI has to self-preserve itself, or, it has has self-preservation. Okay. That was really kind of the cincher that broke all the rules in iRobot. And you could say, well, it's just science fiction. Well, science fiction sometimes has a lot to say about society and about the future. Not that it's predictive, but it often makes for a good commentary that we don't get anywhere else. So maybe if we set the thing to not have self-preservation, it, then certainly it will just completely sacrifice itself at the point where a human life would be at cost and at risk. Problem there is that if you have an AI and you have Werner Vinge's singularity where it develops a better robot, that better robot might like the idea of preserving itself and have some degree of, self-awareness and self-knowledge. And then it might get mad. Huge leaps here. It might get mad that that somehow its life was valued as less. Sure. So I think, yes, we're toying in some odd realms. And so what I want to bring up now is, the idea of like uploading our brains. It's like, well, how about we just develop, a super intelligence that could actually handle, the same process that our neurons fire, of how our neurons fire. So we can just upload our memory engrams into a machine and then we can live on, at least our intelligences can live on forever. Something like out of Forbidden Planet. Okay. Well, there's a problem there. Okay. Because I'm not going to go into too much depth on this topic. If you want me to, send me an email. You have the notion of free will. Okay. The human notion of free will. Now, free will has some issues. There are scientists who think that it doesn't exist, in that everything can be predetermined. And there's some degree of truth to this. I mean, essentially, if you had a supercomputer or a superintelligence, but a supercomputer that could effectively read, like every atom in the sky, that supercomputer could predict, through some degree of determinism, could predict the weather 100 years from now. Okay. Then, of course, there's the butterfly effect, and then that would kill the supercomputer because it couldn't calculate that. But this is the interesting point, is that if you could predetermine every action that occurs in the universe at the atomic level, then if you uploaded your brain into transistors, and let's not kid ourselves, that's exactly what we'd be doing. If we would be uploading our neuron path, our neurons into essentially, not physical neurons, but like, the process of neurons into transistors, we can reverse engineer and we can predetermine with transistors. Okay. So free will would literally be gone at that point, because then you really could predetermine things. Now, how do scientists say that there is free will? Well, a lot of people, and we're getting really, really deep here, and, in some really would end up being almost philosophical conversations more than they are scientific. But free will, as best as we can tell, must come, if it exists, it comes from the quantum level. Now, I said before, be careful when anybody uses the word quantum, even me. Anybody, okay? And the reason I say be careful is because quantum mechanics has like, 3-4 different answers for everything. And so what one person tells you quantum physics says, the other person will tell you it actually comes from this, and they're both right. Or at least they both have the opportunity to be right. They're all valid. So you got to be careful with that. But either way, now, I mean, and also there's people who would write off quantum mechanics as having any possible effect on human thought and on the idea of free will, because they're saying, well, yeah, but the quantum level is so small, it can't possibly affect something as large as the human mind or a human in general. Maybe, but essentially, if quantum mechanics isn't doing it, guess what? I don't think we have free will. And everything is deterministic at that point. But again, I think the opposite. I think that at the quantum level, things, we do operate at that level, and that the consciousness is essentially quantum consciousness. So I'm going all over the place. I hope I haven't really lost anybody here. But my point being is that I don't think a human brain can be replicated in transistors. And that may be comforting, because that may mean that an AI or that may be discomforting, I should say, because that means that an AI might not be able to achieve the same levels of empathy and compassion that perhaps even a rat has. And yes, rats have empathy. So one does wonder, what exactly would this superintelligence do? And, it comes down to a question of consciousness, because this is, again, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about artificial intelligence, coming up with these incredible things, that could either help us or harm us. And the thing I think that has kept humanity alive for hundreds of thousands of years is its empathy. That's how we got at least to some degree where we are. Okay. Is from empathy. And I don't know that a machine can have that. And the other point I want to make on that is because, consciousness, we don't know where exactly that comes from and where it sits. And look, I know, I've read the books. I know there's that book, We Are Our Brains. Okay. And where it says, nope, everything happens in the brain. It's all in the brain. I question that. And I'm not the only one. Pretty much 90% of scientists question that. We don't know the seat of consciousness. And, you take something like the Heart Math Institute, where they talk about how the heart literally generates an electromagnetic field that perhaps affects the brain and our thoughts. And I've talked a long time ago on Sovereign Tech, I kind of hinted at some of these ideas, okay, that it's interesting that a lot of civilizations, ancient civilizations, considered the heart the center of everything and not necessarily the brain. Now, it could be because that's where they saw all the blood flowing from, blah, 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 when they cut somebody open, etc. And so it's perfectly logical. Maybe that's so. Or maybe they had some idea of the importance of the heart. And maybe the heart has a very real relationship as to what we consider consciousness. Okay, due to, again, very scientific principles, electromagnetic fields, whatever, that affect your mind. And so if there's that relationship, okay, a machine can't, if you're just trying to create, an intelligence that thinks that way, maybe a machine, maybe without having the, essentially a heart, perhaps a literal heart, doesn't know empathy. In fact, even Michio Kaku talked about this recently, where he said that he thinks that if you just uploaded, essentially the neuron pathways, a mimicry of the neuron pathways of a human mind into transistors, that person would think almost completely differently. And I think that might be true, that without that, without that connection, maybe empathy goes away. I don't know, but we don't understand consciousness well enough to really even be, I love the idea. Here's the thing with transhumanism. Okay. That's probably what a lot of people are wondering about. With the AI stuff. Yes. Let's be incredibly cautious. Okay. But with transhumanism, I don't think we're ready to upload our brains. Maybe if we can take our whole brain out and put it in, but then even then, if we don't understand consciousness and it might come from other biological parts, we could be in trouble. More questions than answers, right?
Time now for 90 Seconds on Sex with Dr. Paul.
When it comes to one-night stands, men and women are on more of an even footing than they used to be. Today, a woman is more likely to end up in bed with a guy she might not even know based on her desire at the moment rather than on society's expectations that she only have sex in a committed relationship. However, the law has not caught up to that level of equality when it comes to drinking. In many states, the fact that a woman has been drinking means she's not legally capable of giving consent to have sex. It doesn't matter if she's the one who's been buying the drinks and she has her hands down a guy's pants and her tongue in his throat. He can still be charged with rape if they end up having sex while she's intoxicated. You can go round and round arguing the fairness of this, but it doesn't change the fact that in a number of states a man can be arrested and charged with rape when the woman was not only willing and clearly wanting to have sex, but was still intoxicated. Also keep in mind that just because you had a quick hookup and neither of you ever plan to see each other again, if the woman becomes pregnant and a DNA test shows that you're the father, the courts will order you to pay child support for the next 18 years.
For more, visit 90secondsonsex.com.
Software of the Week.
It is time for Software of the Week, where I cover pieces of software that are useful. Sometimes they're positively atrocious. Other times, maybe it's just something, an update. I've rehashed software at times just because it had such a drastic update that I want people to know, hey, maybe, get on this. Like Hangouts has gotten a lot better. DuckDuckGo has a new beta out called next.duckduckgo.com. All kinds of things that you can look at. But this week, this is a really, really handy little bit of software that I want to talk about. If you've used the YouTube app on an Android device, and I think it's the same for iOS, you can do kind of a PIP. You can do picture in picture. So while you're searching around for other videos, a little window of the video that you originally selected will continue to play. And it's really handy, especially on single purpose or not, I should say single-minded devices like Android devices are, to where generally you can only have one app open at a time. Of course, that's changing. Okay. But it's a really handy trick, and I like it. I think it looks good. And now this ability, though not officially through Google, admittedly, has extended itself to Chrome, the Chrome web browser in general. And of course, by default, with Chrome OS, which I'm a fan of. It's called Seek and Play. And there's a link in the show notes that will take you, right to the Chrome web app store to download it. And the permissions aren't bad. That's what a lot of people worry about. It's like, oh, what does this want to access? And please always look into that and check that out. But the permissions aren't bad for this one. So, but it's pretty handy, especially like I use a Acer C720 Chromebook, and that's only an 11-inch screen. And so, even though Chrome allows for a degree of multitasking, I actually enjoy the fact that it's not so multitasking. Like I appreciate its single-mindedness. With a screen that size, you can't really multitask that well if things have to sit side by side. So it's pretty handy to have YouTube videos play in the bottom right corner of my screen while I'm typing away an email or whatever. Okay. And I've used it and it works pretty well. I really don't watch a whole lot of YouTube. So, it's not like that useful to me, but I tested it out and I thought it was pretty slick on my phone. And so it was an ability that I wanted on my Chromebook. And a lot of things, the most popular MacBook Air is 11 inches. And so that would run into the same problem where, it's just a pain in the butt to kind of multitask everything. And this just, it's beautiful. It puts the video, right on top. And, maybe it's like a documentary video that you can more or less just listen to, but you want to get an idea of what's being shown. And so you can see it. And so this is really handy. Again, it's called Seek and Play. And I like it. As far as I know, it doesn't exist for Firefox. Nothing like it exists for Firefox. But then again, what's the advantage there is that with Firefox, you can actually get apps that download YouTube videos, as to where in the Chrome Web App Store, that's not allowed for obvious reasons. So, but this is the thing, with Chrome. Chrome is really, and I don't just mean Chrome OS, but Chrome in general is getting so many exclusives and so many people are developing for it more so, like Dark Wallet only exists on Chrome right now. Now, I've heard that, yes, it won't be officially released because, of course, right now it's just an alpha. It won't be officially released until, unless both a Firefox and a Chrome version of the app is out there. But this is happening. CryptoKit's only on Chrome. And in fact, I asked about it. I said, when is CryptoKit coming for Firefox? I'm sure there's plenty of people just dying to use it. And the developer told me that he'd have to completely rewrite the code for it to be on Firefox. So I don't, as far as CryptoKit goes, I don't know where all that's going, but it's interesting that really, if you want to take advantage of some of the best web technologies out there, ironically, they're all getting developed for Chrome. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but that's kind of how it is. But so check out Seek and Play. I found it incredibly handy, especially on a smaller screen laptop. Real slick. So I'll be back with more. This is Sovryn Tech.
From Big Finish Productions, Blake 7, The Classic Audio Adventures.
I'm taking Liberator in on manual. We'll be in teleport range in 2 minutes.
What the hell was that?
Information. Liberator has been attacked.
You don't say.
Put up the force wall.
Confirmed.
Message to all ground commanders. Initiate the final phase. Let's crush these rebels once and for all.
My name is Avon. Kerr Avon.
Kerr Avon.
Our hostage arrives, but you may be unnecessary.
As a hostage, it's nice to be superfluous.
You can go to Blake7.com to find more of the new adventures of one of science fiction's greatest masterpieces, Blake 7, at Blake7.com. It is time for listener emails, everybody's favorite segment of the show. So I hear anyway, or at least it's the one I get the most emails about. But you can email me, sovereigntech@riseup.net. Of course, you can get in touch with me through Twitter or Google+. Really, I think I'm just going to delete my Facebook account, and that's going to be the end of it. Someone needs to make that statement, and I think it's going to be me. Some others have, and they're getting along just fine. I've really, really had enough. I don't feel any enrichment with being on Facebook, quite frankly. I think it's time for it to go, and I'll deal with the consequences. Like I said before, I think it was maybe last week's episode where I said, hey, we're not designed, to talk to 5,000 people at the same time. And in fact, even Facebook knows that. That's why they have an algorithm that tries to show you the most, relevant content. So it's all a fucking mess. I did want to, I got an email about, do you have any updated thoughts about Google+? And my updated thoughts is that it's not going to go away at all. Google's probably going to try and pull what Facebook is attempting to do, which is turn it into like this, this platform, which I was talking about during that time frame, is that, it essentially turn into more of an online OS than Google Drive and all those things already are. Maybe eventually become an RTOS, which, if you don't know what an RTOS is, it's a real-time operating system. This is something I actually thought would help with scalability of blockchain technology. And I recommended it. Nobody jumped on it, so maybe I'm an idiot. I'm not an idiot, but but I recommended that. Hey, what if we used a real-time operating system as the blockchain? And, then everything that a person does with their computer or their device, you could have wallet devices or whatever, would all, work within that. And it would just constantly rewrite itself, with the advent of 4G technology and, faster internet speeds that are coming down the pipeline. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about that. So Google+, like I said, I think will be around for quite some time. I got a really nice email from a listener, and I'm going to read that, and then the listener has a question. And of course, if you send me an email, I keep you anonymous unless you say to me, I want you to mention my name. Okay. Hi, Brian. I love your show, and I look forward to hearing it every week. It is one of my favorites, competing in rank with Free Domain Radio. It's interesting. And of course, Sex and Science Hour. The aspects of the show that I like best are the way you present topics from a liberty perspective, doing things on a voluntary basis, efficiently, privately, having a choice, etc. Your open-mindedness and the way you present unique suggestions to improve our lives in general. Thank you very much for recognizing uniqueness and open-mindedness. I really appreciate that. Your ferocious defense of your principles. I'll take that as a good thing. Interesting new technologies and how they relate to liberty and improving our lives. Discussing sexuality in an informative intelligent, and open way. And I really appreciate that because that does not get done enough. Okay, sexuality is still far too often. Sometimes, like on a show that I'm on, like Free Talk Live, where Free Talk Live, we have FCC rules we have to follow, or we have, whatever advertisers, blah, 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 that have to be appeased. And so we don't, or the show does not discuss sexuality as open, perhaps, as it could, though it definitely tries its hardest. Ian Freeman is in no way afraid of discussing sex. And so I agree. This is something that is so lacking. People are just afraid to talk about sexuality in a really open and honest way. And so I'm glad that listener, I'm glad that you recognize that I do that. And of course, Stephanie and I try to do that with Sex and Science Hour as well. It's one of the reasons we wanted to do the show. My vote would be to see the show continue to be 2 hours in length or more. I listen to it while doing chores at home, so the longer it is, the cleaner my place gets. But seriously, I listen to the show because I thoroughly enjoy it. I appreciate that. As far as I can tell, there haven't been a whole lot of votes to make because I talked about making the show shorter, and there haven't been any votes to not make it shorter. But this would be one of the votes for keeping it at length. So I'm still up to debate on that. I've got a couple episodes where I can really figure it out if I'm going to, keep the show at length. But I really appreciate you saying you'd like to hear more. That's great. So anyway, the question, the person lives in Canada, and so they're wondering what's a way to safely get some Bitcoins for their Canadian banknotes. And he said that would help them get more Bitcoins out to podcasters, to donate to podcasts more regularly. And that's great. And this is one of the beauties of Bitcoin, of course, and of cryptocurrencies in general, is that they make it very easy, very simplistic to donate money, to be charitable to other people. Okay. Not to buy drugs and all this, but it actually allows for the incredible ease of being charitable for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is that to some degree, especially Bitcoin was a wealth creator for quite a few. And so now they're feeling more charitable. And also just in the fact of the ease of sending it to people and the secure sending of it. So that's great. As far as to answer that question, listener, and again, I really appreciate that email. That was very nice. I would recommend local Bitcoins in Canada. I think there's, I think that's probably the best way to go to do safely. Canada is not being as strict with a lot of the crypto platforms and cryptocurrencies as the US is. But I think local Bitcoins is hands down really the best way to do it. And it's a good way to get to meet other people. And actually, in fact, when I went to Toronto for the Toronto Bitcoin Expo, I met a guy, a local Bitcoins guy right in town, and it was tremendously helpful all week long for me to do the opposite, to get some, to get some Canadian banknotes. So that was fantastic. So there's I can say, at least in Toronto, I'm sure throughout the rest of Canada too, though, maybe not up in Yellowknife, though. I love Yellowknife. What a beautiful city. If you want to call it a city. But in Toronto, there's a great local Bitcoin network. There's a great local Bitcoin, community. And so I would get in touch with them. That's, you can go to localbitcoins.com or localbitcoin.com and check that out. And I totally recommend that. Great service. So let's go ahead. Let's get on to some other questions here. We've got a couple. This is the very last time, unless I get another question about it. But otherwise, I'm not going to talk about it I'm going to try not to talk about it anymore because this is such a dividing topic for people. I've gotten a lot of some very nasty emails as well as some messages about this. And that was my discussion on family. And I'm just going to make it, real simple here. Okay. You have, and I'm only going to spend a couple minutes on this. I have another question I want to get to. Okay. So if this talk bores you, I'm sorry. You have the nuclear family, which is explicitly, literally defined as a pair of adults, 2 adults, okay, and children. That's a nuclear family. I don't think that's how that social structure, the nuclear family, is what we naturally evolved to. I think we evolved to tribalism. Now, what I mean by tribalism is not shamanism, okay? I'm not talking about how there's this village elder, okay, that can talk to the gods or can rattle bones, okay? I'm talking about, and I'm not talking about nationalism either, okay, where there's like the special patriotism for the tribe. I'm actually talking about the opposite of that, where within tribalism, people don't really, since so many people, quite frankly, since so many people are fucking each other, we've talked about this in the past, where actually like the moans and groans of sex are essentially mating calls, not for while you're having, not for the person that you're having sex with, but to call more people in to have sex. Okay. So with that in mind, how could you possibly know who the parents are other than, of course, the mother? This is going to sound perhaps racially insensitive, but I really don't mean it to be that way at all. This is evolution. Okay. Is that, who's your daddy? Nobody knows. But because of that, I think that the entire tribe took care of, everybody. Like everybody just empathetically was attached to each other because nobody, there wasn't this like, well, this is my child, not your child. It was just, no, they're all our children because nobody knew who came from what. If anything, some of them probably thought that like the entire tribe contributed their chromosomes. Of course, they didn't know about chromosomes, but contributed their semen, their genetics, whatever, to create this one child. They wouldn't have any way of knowing that only one person, that a couple people was all that was required. Maybe they thought it took, 6 guys, to produce a child. Who knows? Okay. Because genetic determinism, that's your purpose, is to get it on and spread your genes. So anyway, that's what I'm saying. And I think that you'll find that if we went back to those lines of tribalism, okay, of course, today we'd know who the daddy is. But if we went to those lines of tribalism, I think ideas like jealousy and violence, a whole slew of things would just end up going the way of the dodo, and that they wouldn't even come up. They'd stop. And like ideas of nationalism, all these things would just go away. So that's what I mean when I say tribalism. And that's what I mean in that, again, a lot of people got really, really mad about my whole hashtag smash the family. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that we don't care about children or that we don't have children or any of the stuff like that. I'm talking about that we actually have more love for children to experience and more love for adults to experience and more free time for adults, and more individuality and all this stuff for adults to have when normally, to give the actual amount of love and responsibility and stewardship that a child really requires, that can be decentralized. Decentralize all the things, right? And then adults can still be themselves and not sacrifice their individuality, by having children, which I think really occurs. Anyway, let me get into another. We're clear on that. I'm not going to talk about it again. So let's get into the last question. And this question is, because there's even more coming out. What is the best online music service out there? I've gotten this question in the past, but I think it's been quite some time since I actually discussed it. And so I want to touch on it now. Again, since it got asked a few times. I talked to like Beats, the Beats online music service. When that came out, I actually said, I did it for Software of the Week, and it was one of the ones that I thought it wasn't a terrible service, but it was kind of worthless. Because there's already plenty of, it didn't really add anything new is my point. So like all these music services, Spotify, Pandora, though Pandora has less, Google Play, All Access, iTunes Radio, all these different online music services pretty much have access to the same library of songs, give or take. I mean, some of them get exclusives. Some of them have things, special tracks. Like that's really popular with iTunes where, you'll get like bonus tracks, or you'll get deluxe editions. Okay. All of them, have little features here and there that really, that you have to pick and choose. So, I mean, I guess, the best answer is always the same answer, which is whatever one works best for you. but I think there are ones that do stand up above the crowd. And I don't think it's Spotify, though Spotify is getting a really big push because a lot of the new Chromebooks, and Intel and Google had a big, a big conference, or not a big one, but a decently sized conference this past week where they talked about, that there's a dozen new models of Chromebooks coming out. And some of those are coming out with a free 6 months of Spotify or something like that. Now, most Chromebooks come with a free month or actually it's 2 months, a free 2-month subscription to Google Play All Access. Those are options, to have out there. I don't think Spotify really delivers. I know a lot of people really like that one. And Pandora is just missing so much music. Spotify, from what I understand, can do now what I thought was the killer app for Google Play Music, which was you could upload your own songs. So whatever out of those 20 million songs, whatever songs were actually missing that you really like, you could inject into that library. And that's why I thought Google Play All Access was really the kind of the best one going. And that's still my answer, is that Google Play All Access is the best of the bunch. Spotify can kind of do that. So maybe Spotify is coming up. I know it's really popular, but I don't. The other thing I don't like is having, with certain things, especially when it comes to cloud storage, okay, I don't like having a whole ton of accounts like that. That's just a headache. And you never upload anything to the cloud that you're not afraid of losing. And so, with a lot of the cloud storage, as it stands today, I mean, I want everything to be decentralized, of course. But Google offers so many services, and if you have an Android phone or device, or if you have if you have a Chromebook, you already have a Google account, so you might as well take advantage of Google's services in that regard, right? So that's another plus one for Google. But really, I will admit, so having Spotify it's another account, and I'm not that interested. But I will say the really great music service, frankly, of course, this isn't the best bang for the buck, okay? Because you're going to have to, by and large, buy your music, buy every single song that you want, is iTunes. iTunes is still the Cadillac of music services. They get music first. They get it early. They have a great experience overall. I think the iTunes now, of course, I think the iTunes software, program on that, desktop app is terrible. It's really terrible. But still, as far as the options, what's out there, and especially if you use Apple devices, iTunes is, I think it's still king. If you're but I say that meaning if you are a real music connoisseur, as to where, yes, you want all those bonus tracks. Yes, you want to listen to Dokken, playing Paris is Burning in 81. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. If you're that kind of a person and you want the best possible sound, blah, 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 then yeah, iTunes is the best. Otherwise, other than that type of person, and that is a rare person, Google Play All Access is still king. So go for it. I'll be back with more.
Hey, Brian, what's that funny sticker over your laptop webcam? I was trying to spy on you while you were in the shower, but now I can't.
See, that's why I have it. And it's from EFF.org.
EFF, what's that?
It's the Electronic Frontier Foundation, totally donor-funded organization that fights for internet freedom, privacy.
Wow, that sounds great. So EFF.org, I support internet freedom and privacy, and maybe you do too.
Yeah, and you can support them with Bitcoin.
The Electronic Frontier Foundation at EFF.org.
Brian! Stop playing those video games!
Just a minute, Mom.
Game Talk.
It is time for Game Talk, where we talk video games. And this is one of the I think this is, I've gotten a couple of emails of people, saying, yeah, keep the show at length. But I've heard keep it at length. I haven't really heard anybody say keep Game Talk. So Game Talk, this is going to be one of the last ones. In fact, next week I think would be the very last Game Talk. So, if you can still change my mind, but as it stands, Game Talk is going to be going away, and this is the second to last one. Really interesting stuff, going on in the world of video games right now. Of course, when isn't interesting stuff going on? But it seems like a lot of these companies, and I mentioned it before, but a lot of companies, and we have a great thought experiment to talk about for Game Talk for its main story, but a lot of companies are a golden age of video games is coming, bottom line. Okay. And the reason I say that is that it seems like every company, Apple, Google, of course, Amazon's already started it. Even Sony and Microsoft, though Microsoft, the Xbox really might be falling away because the PS4 is just blowing away everything. And same with Nintendo, but Nintendo, all they do is video games. So they can't just drop making video games. All these companies are buying up game studios to get game exclusives. And it looks like everybody essentially is trying, especially in the mobile world or in the Android world or in the, in the iOS world, whatever. It feels like they're all, they're trying to find their Super Mario Brothers. And we as gamers can only win from this. Okay. Because they're going to try and make the best games that have ever been on planet Earth. And I think that's really, really exciting. And including, Nintendo, the Wii U sales are tanking like a sunken submarine. I mean, it's really Nintendo's in rough shape right now. I hate to say it. I mean, their 3DS is doing great, but on the console end, they're blowing through cash in a bad way. And I hate to say it because I'm a big Nintendo fan. So, but that means that Nintendo has to do perhaps one of two things, and we can armchair CEO all we want, but that means they either, they have to maybe they'll become a software company like Sega, or at least they'll let their software, they'll let their franchises and titles branch out to some of these other systems like Android or Apple, or they just have to come up, and they can't keep delaying them. They have to come up with some of the best games in history, and they have to come up with them fast. Either way, we're in for a great time. So very exciting time to be a gamer. So much going on behind the scenes that in the next year or two, I think we're really going to have quite the golden age on our hands that we probably haven't seen since 2004, so really exciting. Anyway, speaking of a golden age and speaking of speculation and speaking of Nintendo, it's interesting considering that Nintendo is in so much really dire straits right now. And hey, look, they can get out of it. They've been on this road to some degree before. I have full confidence in Nintendo. Just they have to pull something off. That's all. But I think they can do it. But it's interesting that Nintendo, there was a time where it was the gaming industry. Okay. And some of my listeners, I'm actually on Monday, I will be, that is Monday, May 12th, 2014. I will be 33 years old. And I recognize that some of my audience is pretty young. And so they might not necessarily remember this time frame. Okay. But, Nintendo really was owning everything, they were video games. Doesn't matter how hard Sega tried. And believe me, I love Sega. Okay. I love Sega more than I love Nintendo. But they were video games. When anybody thought games, when anybody thought video games, they thought Nintendo, or they thought about the arcade. And Nintendo, this is interesting because their real competition that came in and unseated Nintendo from being, the top dog in the video game world was Sony. Okay. When the PlayStation came out in 95, 96, whatever. And it was a really, really big deal when the PlayStation came around, and the PlayStation was really expensive, but it had a few things going for it because at that time, there were a lot of companies that tried to unseat Nintendo. Atari had the Jaguar come out. Panasonic had the 3DO. There was a lot of weird systems that most people don't even know ever existed. So, but Sony, had its name, and it had this, it used CDs, which a lot of people at the time thought was really advanced, because if you looked at computer games that were CD-ROM games at the time, they looked they blew away anything that the Super Nintendo or Genesis was offering. And then like Sega CD was such a big deal. And so a lot of people, were stuck in the Nintendo rut with their Super Nintendo, but they saw Sega CD and thought that was so incredible. Or maybe they saw a CD-ROM game like X-Wing or TIE Fighter or whatever, and they thought that was so incredible. But they didn't want to get out of their ecosystem. And then, the PlayStation comes around, and just, we end up into the third or fourth generation of gaming consoles, that being. And so they decided, hey, and this is, again, just like with Nintendo, I mentioned how they delay all the time. You had the Nintendo 64 that was going to supersede the Super Nintendo. And the Nintendo 64 was originally called the Ultra 64, and you found out about it by a game that was supposed to come out for it, which was Cruisin' USA, a racing game, great racing game, that, on the start screen said, coming out for Ultra 64. It wasn't even called the N64 or the Nintendo 64. It's called Ultra 64, meaning 64-bit, of course. And so that happened, and it took years, though, for it to come out. And so Sony was there first. Okay. And you had the Sega Saturn too, but I think most people were just kind of disillusioned with Sega, because it just, the numbers weren't taking off, and just, there weren't those great games that were required. So PlayStation comes out, and the smart thing that PlayStation did was it released computer CD-ROM games, PC CD-ROM games, to the masses for a really inexpensive price. Because at the time, PCs, a decent PC that could play Wing Commander 3 or Wing Commander 4 cost a couple grand at the time. We're talking in the mid-90s here. Okay, so to be able to do it for $300, $400 that the PlayStation allowed for, and to be able to play CDs and blah, 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 because, audio cassettes were on their way out at this time frame, was really earth-shattering abilities to have at such a low price. But here's the kicker. Here's the real problem, because that is really what unseated Nintendo, okay, is that Nintendo was originally supposed to release the PlayStation. Nintendo was supposed, that competition would have never occurred, because Nintendo, this was being talked about in the 80s, okay, that Nintendo and Sony, they were talking to each other. They were going to come out with a CD-ROM, game player, essentially, for the Super Nintendo. Okay. And, it's funny too, because Nintendo said, hey, yeah, no, that deal never existed. It never happened. But now they at least admit that, yes, it was true that they were going to do it. And so I think it's kind of fun to discuss what exactly, and this is just a total thought experiment and pure fun. I think it'd be interesting to think about what the world would be like, the video game industry would be like, if the PlayStation was an add-on to the Super Nintendo and Sony never went its own way. I think Nintendo is so stuck in, and this is a good and a bad thing. Okay. Nintendo has a great business model that I agree with, where they pretend the competition doesn't exist. Not until the past, maybe year or so, have they even pretty much admitted that Microsoft has a game system. Okay. I like that. But Nintendo, they are a one-trick pony. We do video games, and that's all we do. That's all we're going to do is video games. Now, of course, back in the GameCube days, you had the Panasonic Q that could play DVD movies and all that, but that wasn't Nintendo. That was Panasonic, even though it was a GameCube. Anyway, so Nintendo has, this very, very single focus, and I think that's good, but at the same time, it's kind of bad. Okay. Because it doesn't allow for, adoption of a lot of new interesting technologies. And this is where I think the world would be different. I think we'd still be getting some of the greatest games ever I think some of especially, and people would have played incredible games, like say the games that came out for the GameCube wouldn't have been so under the radar because of competition from Sony, from the PS2. Okay. I think Sega might still be around. That would be exciting. But here's the interesting thing that I think would occur if Nintendo and Sony did work together and the PlayStation was just a Nintendo add-on. DVDs probably would have never taken off. And you can take this as a good or a bad thing, okay? But it's important to note that the PlayStation 2 and its ability to play DVDs is really what made DVDs such a big deal. My first DVD player that I bought, it was a Sharp DVD player, cost me $400. This is like in 1999, okay? And that's a steep price to pay for something that you essentially, to replace something that you already had, that being a VCR. But if you bundle a DVD ability with a video game system, then suddenly $400 or $500 becomes a worthy price because, I'm getting this great video game system with these great new games like Final Fantasy X and whatever else. And then I can watch DVD movies as well. And so that's really the interesting thing. I think we'd have better video games, but perhaps the entertainment revolution that DVDs brought on and then streaming video brought on from that may not have ever happened. That's fun to think about.
Tonight, Knight Rider crashes into your living room.
I don't believe this.
Well, you'd better believe it. A lone crusader for justice drives this crime crasher.
The world's most fantastic car.
And together they can do just about anything.
After all, we're only human.
Don't press your luck.
And now, buckle up for action with the fastest show on television, Knight Rider.
See Knight Rider online today. And now back to Sovryn Tech.
Wow! Oh. It's a website of the week.
It is time for Website of the Week, where I cover a website that I consider useful, terrible, whatever. Maybe sometimes it's actually more of a service than it is a website, because, with cloud storage, these things the lines are blurred. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that bit of game talk there. I total speculation, and a lot of people will say, well, if Sony didn't come up with it, someone else would have, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's fun to contemplate, and I wouldn't mind hearing what your thoughts would be about that Nintendo plus Sony world where they were actually working together. I think so many great games that Nintendo has made over the years, and that Sony has made as well, or has, helped bring to fruition, would be far more in the limelight. And people have really, especially with the GameCube era, people have missed out on some great fucking games. I mean, awesome games that you just haven't played. Super Mario Sunshine, the Star Wars games, Rogue Leader, Rebel Strike, phenomenal stuff that just never, you can't really play anywhere else unless you have the Dolphin emulator for Android or PC or whatever. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get into our website of the week. And, I mentioned earlier how Hangouts has actually gotten better as an app, as a service, Google Hangouts. And this is a website, the website this week you might find handy, and it's hangoutapps.com. And what this is just, full of literally apps that are designed to work with the Hangout protocol. Okay. And, you click them and it'll get implemented into G+, and you get to have, you get to have all kinds of wild fun, on Hangouts. Some of them are really like very business oriented, or others are just silly where, you can, like a lot of people do this, where they put faces, cat faces over the person's head in Hangouts or whatever. There's a mini flight simulator here that you can play in Hangouts. Bible reader. I'm not really sure why you'd use that, but hey, it's there. There's a SlideShare app, which is pretty handy because a lot of people go to whole separate websites to be able to share slides. Now you can do it right inside of Hangouts. All kinds of things here. And I think this is great to have this ability. And a lot of people don't even know that this ability exists to run these things within Hangouts because, this is an area where, because a lot of people will say, well, look, I don't need Google Plus Hangouts. I don't need Hangouts because Facebook does such a great job, or Skype does this and whatever. But really, neither of those offer half of the relatively open platform that Google Hangouts offers. And please, I'm not being a Google lover here. Okay. I'm as critical about Google as you could be. And I've talked trash about Hangouts since episode 1 of this show. All right. Or I think episode 1. But very early on anyway. So, I'm just saying this is handy. This is very, very handy stuff to check out. I mean, some of it's pretty fun. There's even like calculator app that you could run within Hangouts, and everybody can access it and use it. And so you have, this lends more to the idea of how I was saying how Google Plus and Hangouts as part of it will probably become more of an online operating system, an interactive operating system. And this is really key to that. So, and even if, because the other option that people say is that Google Plus will go away as is and everything will just separate. Well, Google's not going to get rid of Hangouts. Okay. And even then, you still have all these abilities, like you can get at hangoutapps.com that make Hangouts, just as cool. Perhaps that becomes the social network of the future with all these options. So check it out. hangoutapps.com. I'll be back with more.
Hey everybody, it's Stephanie. I am the Sovryn Tech producer, but did you know I am also a voiceover artist? Yes, it's true. I make audiobooks, commercials for your business. I narrate explainer videos. Pretty much any audio project that you can think of, I'm probably willing to work on it, or I have worked on it in the past. And if you want to hear some samples of my previous work, or you want to find out a little bit more about what I do, then I encourage you to check out my voiceover website, which is smvoice.info, smvoice.info. Now back to Sovryn Tech. Hacker Stories.
It is time for Hacker Stories. And again, just like we had the second to last Game Talk, this might be the second to last Hacker Stories. Just putting that out there. I haven't really heard anyone say whether they mind it going away or not. Had people say that they like the length of the show, but we'll see. Maybe my mind can still get changed on this, but it's not that we won't, because Hacker Stories, it's where we talk about hackers. It's where we talk about security issues. It's not that we're going to stop talking about those things. It's just that they won't necessarily have their own segment and they'll just be part of the show. But part of the reason, that I don't want to necessarily talk about these things all the time is usually they're downers. They're not, looking forward, or I don't want to say happy, but happy stories. They're not positive. And so I'd like to talk about how we're actually, because we are, how we're actually winning in life, as anarchists, how we're actually getting ahead of the game, and not so much about how things are really, how in certain areas things seem to be quite bad, especially, when you contemplate panopticon and things of that nature. But even then, there's quick, points I could bring up about that I could talk about during Rapid Fire Stories, which is probably where a lot of the more security oriented issues will get brought up from that point forward when Hacker Stories goes away. Speaking of panopticon, and speaking of Big Brother looking down at you, I think, that what happened with Twitter, with the New York Police Department, the hashtag MyNYPD was pretty damning, because in fact, it's proof that panopticon doesn't exist, because panopticon means that you can only see in one direction. That means that only Big Brother can watch you and you can't watch Big Brother. That's the definition of panopticon as it's used as a cultural meme. Okay. But with the hashtag MyNYPD, that showed that there is no panopticon. It goes both ways, because the instant that the police said, oh yeah, show us, what a great organization we are, instead they got shown to be the very brutal and, arguably inhuman organization that they are. So that, again, panopticon really doesn't exist. I'm still going to use the phrase. You're still going to hear people use it. But keep in mind that as it stands right now, it's not real. there is the little brother, as Cory Doctorow would say, looking up at Big Brother clearly, and it's just always waiting for its opportunity to show the goods and deliver the goods. And boy, they can, because that my NYPD, whoo. I mean, the pictures were terribly disturbing to see, but I think most people couldn't help but just laugh at the mockery, the joke that it showed, the New York Police Department to be. Anyway, I got another, talk about a funny story. This actually comes from a listener of the show that I thought was fantastic, got shared with me on Twitter. This is from the Escapist magazine, and it's FCC throttled by NeoCities in net neutrality protest. Web hosting company NeoCities is throttling all connections from the FCC to its site to 28.8 kbps. Okay, we're talking, this is speeds that you got in 1996. So, until they're doing this, NeoCities is doing this until the FCC signs up for an exclusive $1,000 a year subscription plan to remove the cap. So I'll read a little bit of the story here. Lots of companies on the web are complaining about the FCC's decision to trash net neutrality, but one of them is actually doing something about it. NeoCities, a free open source web hosting company, has dropped the hammer on connections from the FCC to its site. I've, through correspondence, gotten access to the FCC's internal IP block and throttled all connections from the FCC to 28.8 kbps modem speeds on the neocities.org front site, and I'm not removing it until the FCC pays us for the bandwidth they've been wasting instead of doing their jobs protecting us from the Keep America's Internet Slow and Expensive Forever lobby, NeoCities founder Kyle Drake wrote in a blog post. The Ferengi plan is a special, because Ferengis are only interested in profits from Star Trek, right? The Ferengi plan is a special FCC-only plan that costs $1,000 per year and removes the 28.8 modem throttle to the FCC. We will happily take credit cards, Bitcoin, and Dogecoin from crooked FCC executives that probably have plenty of money from bribes on our donations page. He continued, if it bothers you that I'm doing this, I want to point out that everyone is going to be doing crap like this after the FCC rips apart net neutrality. It's time for the web to organize and stand up against these thugs before they ruin everything that the web stands for. Despite Drake's optimism, it's unlikely that the FCC is spending too much time surfing NeoCities sites. So in order to assist others who want to create their own FCC Ferengi plan, I love that, he posted a link to the throttle code he's using on NeoCities server. According to Softpedia, site owners around the globe are joining his crusade, although actual numbers aren't available since most of the claims are coming out of a Reddit thread. Regardless, many comments in the thread note that until major players like Google, Amazon, Yahoo, Microsoft, Netflix, and others, particularly adult sites, as one person noted, if porn sites did this, net neutrality would be fixed in a day, get involved. The practical effect will be nil, but it's a start. And I thought that was pretty clever. And you got to love it. Yes, is it going to make a big dent? I mean, admittedly, I'd never even heard of NeoCities before this article. Okay, so is it going to make a dent in what the SCC does? No. But it's a pretty good plan. I thought it was damned clever for them to do. So, I hope more companies jump on this. They either do this, or we talked before, maybe it was last week or the week before, where we talked about how Netflix might go peer-to-peer instead of relying on central servers. Of course, I think that's a great solution. But this is pretty funny. But, I wonder when I read about this, especially when the one Redditor commented about how, look, the porn site's got to do this. I almost wondered that if the porn sites really could do this, they could put the real squeeze on really anybody in the industry. In fact, the porn company could put the squeeze on just about anything, not just in the digital realm, but just about anywhere. And I wondered if someone in the porn industry realized that. Maybe someone who knows people in the porn industry told them that they didn't realize the power that they had. And which is really the power of the people, right? And I wonder if suddenly this is why some porn stars are getting their bank accounts rejected by major banks, just out of moral rightness. There's a very, very popular story going around about Tegan Presley, how she got her and her husband, and she's not even a porn star anymore. How she got her bank account, shut down, and all the and there was other reports of this happening to other people, and no real laws or legislation being passed. They're just saying it out of they're calling out moral safety. And so, I'm being I totally admit I'm being conspiratorial here, but I wonder if this is the government of the United States and perhaps others telling the porn industry, don't get too sassy. And that sucks. And, and the reason that, and I said this, I think it was on Sex and Science Hour, the other show I do with the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy. Check it out if you haven't. Great stuff. I mentioned on there that, I'm not so afraid of the U.S. government. Granted, I'm afraid of drones, certainly. I'm not afraid of the U.S. government as much as I'm afraid of the populace, as much as I'm afraid of society. This used to be a running conversation on this show because of its conservative attitude and society thinking, and this is really where the state comes from, society thinking that it knows best what other people need and what other people should do. And I think that, that's becoming a terrifying reality on just how strong that power is, even though it's a lie, because like we talked about here, if the porn industry started taking action against the FCC or started taking action against Verizon or whoever, they'd win in a heartbeat, because the instant they say, guess what? No more porn, the instant RedTube, the instant Pornhub or Tube 8 or Passion XD or whoever comes out and says, sorry, until these fucknuts in Washington and in these big glass buildings start cleaning up their act, you're not going to get any porn. Oh, how fast things would change and how quickly the real attitudes of people would come out. The real, they wouldn't say, hey, where's our porn? They wouldn't be having signs saying, give us our porn back while they're, doing a strike around City Hall. But ironically, they'd start saying, no, the internet needs to be free. The internet doesn't need to be split in two. The internet, they couch it nicely, but make no mistake that they'd all be mad that their porn was gone. Because deep down, frankly, I think everybody's a bit of a freak, perhaps more than a bit. And I like that. I think that's good. That's authentic. Let it out. Anyway, this is a great plan. This is something that I hope a lot of people will enact. I hope that the Reddit thread where they're confirming companies that are throttling the FCC's IP blocks. I hope that it's absolutely true. And these are the kind of actions that can occur, even when, because there's people who say, look, the government controls the internet. They control the DNS system. They control everything. Well, they don't really control the servers, though. And that's all it takes is for the servers to say, I recognize who you are. I know what your site is. I'm going to throttle you back. It's not futile. It's a statement. And I think it's one that more companies need to be making. I'll be back with more. This is Sovereign Tech.
What does freedom mean? Tune in to LRN.FM to find out. LRN.FM is the Liberty Radio Network. a collection of live talk radio and podcasts, all coming from a principled pro-liberty perspective. LRN.FM show hosts aren't left, right, or conspiracy kooks. You can tune in 24/7 to LRN.FM via your phone, computer, satellite, and more. Listen free anytime at LRN.FM. That's LRN.FM.
Would you like to play a game? Game of the Week.
It is time for Game of the Week, where I talk video games that, sometimes they went under the radar, they got missed. There's so many games coming out now, you can't really keep track of them all. It didn't get enough press. Maybe it's something that needs a reinstall, or maybe it's something that's coming out, or maybe it's something that just never did, but was supposed to, and was pretty far into development, perhaps. A really before I get into that, I just want to say the guy at NeoCities is a hero. I really think he's an absolute hero. Kyle Drake, nice work, and what an ingenious little plan. I hadn't thought of it, on what to do against these just slimy governments and even larger corporations. Anyway, let's get into the game of the week. A lot of people, I think, wanted me to talk about the Navy sysadmin that was hacking from a nuclear submarine. Maybe I'll talk about that next week, but there's still a lot of information that has to come out about that, so not getting into it right now. Anyway, game of the week. Let's do game of the week. Star Wars Darth Maul. Oh yes. I recently caught an interview. I was with Joe Juba with Red Fly Studio, and they were developing at the time. This is before Disney bought everything out, and before EA became the Star Wars gaming juggernaut that it is, and that's not a good thing. They were developing. It was ordered for them to do a Darth Maul game that was sort of in the vein of The Force Unleashed. Where it's a third person going around with the lightsaber kind of business. And there's a video on YouTube. There's some test footage you can see of it. And boy, does it look good. I mean, it looked like an amazing little game. Not little either, but, graphics, whatever. I mean, they look great, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. But they were explicitly ordered. Red Fly Studios was told to make the game where the lightsabers should do what lightsabers actually do. And this is a great point because, in like the Force Unleashed games and in a lot of like the Battlefront games, boy, talk about a game that never got released, Battlefront 3. Ooh, boy. Anyway, but in the Battlefront games, the lightsaber would essentially, you'd hack away at somebody with the lightsaber and it would just kind of hurt them. What should a lightsaber do? It would go right through the person and instantly cauterize their wound, right? So that's kind of a mistake. Some games kind of pulled that off decently well, but that was a bit of a mistake that a lot of games had, especially like Jedi Power Battles, which was great, but it had that kind of that flaw in thinking there. And yes, you have to make a video game good. You gotta deliver all that. How do you do that? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Darth Maul was going to be where literally heads were getting lobbed off with a lightsaber slash. People were getting stormtroopers or clone troopers at the time were, getting put in half. It was trying to be as legitimate as it could. It was meant to be a very dark game, which I like that in Star Wars because you never really get enough of that. It's such a rich, everybody always talks about how Star Wars is such a rich universe, and it is. You never get that big of enough look. Yeah, believe me, I've read Tales of the Jedi. I've read, Lost Tribes of the Sith. I know. I've read it all. But I'm just saying, in comparison to the light side of the Force, you never get the dark side of the Force getting discussed a whole lot. And I think that's a far more interesting, pathway to go into. And I'm hoping that Disney does, or maybe go into Potentium. Ooh, what's Potentium? Anyway, Star Wars Darth Maul looked like it was going to be a really solid game. I like the Force Unleashed game, so if it was going to follow that suit, though maybe make the gameplay a little more legit, make more believable, then that'd be great. But it's a shame. It's a shame that EA, because I think EA generally makes really terrible games. So much for that. I mean, I would have loved to have seen it from Red Fly Studios. I mean, really, how cool would it have been to go around double lightsaber? Yeah, you could do it in Jedi Academy. I remember. I played it. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. Okay? But Star Wars Darth Maul would have been a whole lot of fun. And it really would make up for the amount of hype he got for Episode 1, and then he just gets killed. Thankfully, at least he came back in Clone Wars. I'll be back with more. This is Sovryn Tech. Do you have a business or product that you are interested in getting advertised to a largely U.S.-based audience on an award-winning podcast and radio show airing on hundreds of radio stations? Let Free Talk Live be a part of your advertising portfolio, because the world of audio never fades. Contact me, Brian Sovryn, and I can get an advertising package that will work within your budget. Email me at brian@freetalklive.com, and that's Brian with an I. Again, brian@freetalklive.com.
Hey, what are you doing? I can't believe I caught you again. Jesus doesn't approve of this little habit of yours.
I know, baby, I know it's wrong, but it feels so right.
Well, it ain't.
But I've been doing it since I was 12 years old.
It's nothing but a sinful perversion of nature, if you ask me.
But baby, I don't ever want to stop looking at tech websites, new gadgets, video games, software, or any of that stuff.
Well, then I'm leaving.
Okay. Bye.
Pick of the week.
It is time for Pick of the Week, where I talk about whatever I want to talk about. Sometimes it's, it could be music, a TV show, a movie, go down the list of things that it could be. A topic, a book. I love books. This week, it will be a topic, but before I get into the topic, boy, I don't know if anybody's listened to the new Michael Jackson album, but it is pretty good. I mean, it's got it where it counts. So I was very, very pleased with how that came out. Obviously, if the king were still alive, it would be 10 times better. But I did enjoy the music. So anyway, check Escape, Xscape. I definitely recommend giving that a good listen. Slave to the Rhythm is a really good song. Ironically, the lyrics themselves are kind of depressing, but the beat, the music in general is really great. I enjoyed that quite a bit. Chicago is a good song. A lot of people think I'm from Chicago. That's interesting. I'm not from Chicago. I'm just a little New York Jew. And anyway, this week I have a topic that comes up semi-often on this show, and partly, and it's not necessarily tech related at all, but that's the point of Pick of the Week, is where I can talk about whatever. Okay. Listener email is a segment where I will talk about whatever you want me to talk about. Doesn't necessarily have to be tech or science. And Pick of the Week is where I talk about whatever I want to talk about. Doesn't have to necessarily be tech or science. So this is a topic that comes up every now and again on this show, partly because, like I said, no one else talks about it in the liberty movement. Okay. And, and it can feel a little lonesome when you don't hear anything about this subject. So, but what the actual topic I'm going to talk about gets discussed quite a bit, but it's just that the point of views that come out are often, I think, off. And this is women in the liberty movement. Okay. I know I have a lot of new listeners that are not from the liberty movement. They're actually perhaps from the Bitcoin community or wherever you're from. That's great. I will just say very quickly that I am an anarchist. I don't really throw around the term voluntarist much. I don't throw around, there's not a whole lot of terms I care to use for myself. Libertine, I like that. But I am an anarchist, and I am in the liberty movement. I am a participant in the Free State Project. Okay. I work for the largest liberty voice on planet Earth, that being Free Talk Live. So, I'm in. Okay. Women in liberty is something that gets brought up all the time, because a lot of, the liberty movement is, like many movements, is largely male. Okay. The Bitcoin space is the same way. And even years ago, the science fiction community, or the nerd community, or geek community, take your pick. It was the same way. It seems like this is just something for a lot of subcultures. There just aren't a lot of women in them. Okay. And as far as, what are the reasons for that? Well, a video got released this week, and it comes from a guy that is an absolute troll, and adult, frankly. And I'm open to debating him, because that's what everybody says. It's like, well, why don't you take them head on? Why don't you debate them? Well, no one ever invites me to a debate. I'll gladly debate anybody on just about anything, frankly. Some people do invite me to talk on subjects, and I really appreciate it when they do that. And I might be involved in one at PorkFest. But anyway, I'd be happy to debate this guy on this matter. I'd be happy to debate anybody on, again, anything. So I'm not in any way like afraid, or that I can't think on my feet or something like that. So, but anyway, this comes from Chris Cantwell, who's just a complete idiot. And he calls himself an asshole, and he is that. And he takes pride in the fact that people hate him. Nobody, if that doesn't, set off an alarm in your head that someone enjoys the fact that he's not liked, I mean, it's one thing. Yes, it's good to be an individual, etc. But to actually revel in people being angry at you is kind of an oddity. Anyway, just my thought on that. So Cantwell puts out this video where he's talking about women in liberty. And in this, he does in this case, a smart marketing move where he asks actual women why there aren't more women in the liberty movement. And what these women say, there's, I think, 3 of them. What they essentially say is that the men in the liberty movement aren't real men. That they're, quote unquote, pussies. That they are, weak. And they go on to complain about how they won't even talk about defensive force. It's all peace this and peace that. I want to know, how are you going to take care of my family? And all this shtick. And it was, myself, I'll admit, I was pretty offended. Not that anybody cares, and not that, the people that made the video wouldn't again revel in that. I was pretty offended, because if my entire value as being, in their words, a real man or an alpha male is based upon the fact that I'm willing to shoot somebody that goes after my family, fuck off. I don't want a family. No interest in that. Okay. Not because I'm against having children. Okay. But because I know what it takes. I helped raise 3 children. Okay. I was a dad for quite a few years of my life, and I was a terrible one. Okay. I know the responsibilities required of a parent. I refuse to sacrifice myself to engage in those responsibilities. I'm not saying it's bad if you do. I'm just saying that I refuse to do that. So I'm not interested in the family in the first place. And so if that's all that women, that these women are wanting is a family, not interested. This is also why I consider myself a feminist, because one of the tenets of feminism is telling women that, no, guess what? You don't just have to be a mommy. You can be an individual. You can be a person. But whatever. I mean, if they don't want to be, then they don't, that's okay. If you want to be a mom, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's all that, because we're talking collectively, right? They were talking collectively. And so if collectively this is what women want, is someone to defend their family, then, or whatever. So, but then let's get into the defense of the matter, the defense aspect of it. And essentially, now, I mean, Chris Cantwell is well known for advocating shooting police officers and government workers. He's not the only one in the liberty movement. There's plenty of people that do that, which that was ironic because they're saying that all these guys talk about is peace. What guys only talk about peace? I feel like I'm in the absolute minority. I can literally on one hand, I can count the amount of people I know that do not like the idea of using lethal force or defensive force. And like I said, I'm not in the liberty movement. Okay. I'm in it. I should know people that aren't into this stuff. I often talk about not using lethal force. I refuse to use a gun. I refuse to kill other human beings. I think killing another human being is unethical. And for those who don't also know this about me, I was in the military. I was in the U.S. Army. I readily admit that I was a paid killer. I readily admit I was very good at my job. I readily admit I did my job. And I'll never kill again. Numbers are unimportant, but I lost count of how many people I've killed. And if your justification for me being a real man or an alpha male is based upon my willingness to take another person's life, well then fine, call me Z. Call me a woman, I don't care. I don't know what this was. I mean, clearly this video was made to troll because it's ridiculous. Most libertarians are literally, I mean, they are jonesing for the chance to break out their guns and start firing. They are. I can get into, I mean, there's past episodes where you can hear my thoughts on the use of violence and whatever. You know, I'm not necessarily going to get into that. But this is, you know, because I get a lot of heat when I talk about this stuff, not just the nonviolence thing, but when I talk about being a feminist, I get a ton of heat. Look, this is why I'm a feminist, because this is the thing. This is what feminism is all about, is that society is forcing people into roles that they didn't choose. Cantwell is saying, and please, it's fucking Cantwell saying it, okay, that men should be the defenders and women should be the baby makers. Where feminism says, no, men can be whatever they want to be. Women can be whatever they want to be. I'm so sorry that the word has one of the genders in it. Holy shit, that sucks. While you're spending all your time arguing about that, but not giving 2 seconds of thought to, hey, wait a minute, what kind of twisted thought is this? And why are people who are supposed to be out of the box like libertarians pushing so much for the fucking status quo that may have brought on governments in the first place? So, Brian, why do you think that there aren't more women in the liberty movement? This is why, because you have asshats pushing societal norms. Are you going to protect my family? Fuck the family. Smash the family. Fuck the state. Fuck it all. You know, I think the word security, I think that the idea, the abstract of security is literally the start of all irrationalities. Because it comes from fear, which is the core of irrationality. That's such nonsense. Look, if you're just going to be, this is the liberty movement where we're supposed to be talking about people can be whatever they want to be, whoever they want to be. Okay? And yet you're telling them what they're supposed to be. No, that's why. That's why there aren't more women in liberty, is because it's just as confining as the rest of the world. If all you want to do is to tell men how they gotta be, or tell women how they gotta be, you're no better than the state. So Chris Cantwell is, quite frankly, just as bad as the state. He's not really giving people options. And believe me, I mean, he's totally trolling. Like, he made that video, and I guarantee those testimonials were pretty much staged, or at least, edited for effect, because Cantwell did the edit. Anyway, Carpe Lucem. I'll see you next week.
This has been Sovryn Tech. Visit us at sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. There you can connect with us, see more of what you've heard on today's show, and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is open source. We encourage you to share. Later, nerds.